didn't do it. It didn't go live for some reason. Oh, there it goes. Bam.
This is Mike Cote, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
That's funny. My system is giving me it's beguiling today. It's not cooperating. Thank you guys both for coming on. Congratulations, Mike, on your family news. That's huge. You know how these things go. While we're talking, the news is going to be changing, and so I wanted to take a chance to check in with you guys both and talk about Iran versus Israel. What are your thoughts? I guess initially, Mike, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Amber.
Yeah, I mean, long overdue. I think that's the main thought that I have here is that the Iranian regime's been essentially at war with us for almost 50 years now. One of the first acts they had is after the Islamic Revolution was taking American hostages, holding them for almost 450 days. And that was, kicking it off on the right foot for them. For us, I feel like we've kind of pussyfooted around this for quite some time. We've done some actions against Iran here and there, obviously ramping up in the first Trump term with the assassination of Soleimani, and then obviously Midnight Hammer last year. But now I think we're finally recognizing reality for what it is, that this is an enemy regime. They are not getting any better. They seek to attack us and our friends and our interests. They consort with our enemies. And at this point, I think there really hasn't been an instance where the Islamic Republic has been weaker than it is now. And so taking advantage of that, at the same time trying to deter them and stop them from gaining nuclear weapons. I've heard a lot, obviously, last year we had that Operation Midnight Hammer, really obliterated a lot of their nuclear facilities, but doesn't mean that that's stopped them from trying. And they're definitely trying to reconstitute that program. They have been. They're building ballistic missiles. That's kind of an underrated part of this threat, but they don't need long-range ballistic missiles to hit Israel, right? That's the one thing I always think about. They can hit Israel with plenty of their more short-range ballistic munitions, which they have been doing. But if they're trying to build longer range or intercontinental ballistic missiles, either build them or source them from places like China or Russia, those are not targeted towards Israel. Those are targeted towards us. And so I think we need to be very clear-eyed about the threat that Iran poses. And I'm glad that the Trump administration is taking action on that front. We'll see how this goes. So far, so good, I think. The objectives seem to be limited and achievable. But again, that's something that we'll have to see how this all plays out. But at this point, I'm thinking, hey, it's been way too long that we haven't been confronting this regime and doing what we needed to do to secure our own interests in the region and more broadly. So I'm very glad that this is happening right now.
Amber, welcome back to the show. Always a pleasure. Did we give diplomacy enough of a chance in this case?
Absolutely. Diplomacy was exhausted. And I don't know if any of you saw Steve Witkoff's interview last night. He said, basically, at the first meeting, Iran comes into the room and they are bragging about how much fortified material they have, that they're going to be pursuing nuclear weapons. This is absolutely the operating principle of the regime at this point, and laughed in their faces as to diplomacy. It was never serious on the part of Iran. It was a buy for time situation. And I think after Operation Midnight Hammer, they thought that they could continue fortifying material and building deep underground. But Marco Rubio also yesterday had a pretty compelling press conference where he laid out the decisive action, went into the oppressive structures of Iran to say Epic Fury has 4 guiding principles, and that is destroy regime missiles, annihilate their navy, ensure terrorist proxies can't do any more harm, and ensure Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. But he was very clear to say we were going to lose the window of time to combat all of these challenges should they arm up. Like, the threshold was getting too high, and this is the opportunity. So if you look at Midnight Hammer as the first prong, and then this is the second prong. But overall, this was overdue, and diplomacy, again, was performative at this point. I think everyone gave it their best effort.
I'm going to take a break here real quick.
I completely agree on that one. Yeah.
I'm going to bring Santino in to say hi to him. Santino, hey, we're scheduled for the next hour. If you can't come back, then. If not, we can exchange on email. I don't want to keep you in the dark and out of it.
Sorry, I thought 10 a.m. Arizona time, so I don't know.
Oh, no, Pacific. My bad. Everybody say hi to Santino. He's a world-class
Santino.
flight trainer.
Hi, how are you
Here's
doing?
his book. Early plug.
Yes,
I'll check in
yes.
with you via email, man. I will
Okay,
talk to you
check in.
soon.
Yeah, and we'll reschedule, and I'll hop on, and we'll do something moving forward later.
Perfect. Thank you so much, my friend. So the we get upset when diplomacy doesn't work and we have to go to these more extreme measures. We've ratcheted up the pressure. This administration is not going to allow the Iranians to capture boats and soldiers, sailors. We're not going to allow that in this administration. So they get to advance the ball. Also, the amount of chaos that Iran has caused, either directly or indirectly, has been expensive in terms of life, money, liberty for decades now. Why are we struggling with toppling this to the point where there's people who are taking the Iranian, and I should say the Iranian government's side of this? What is it about this conflict that is causing us so much stress after decades of failed attempts to get them to come about and be part of the world order?
I mean, for me, I think a lot of it, people's brains are kind of been warped by the war on terror. That was a very, very different conflict than this is, and it was related in many ways because one of the main drivers of the war on terror, at least in terms of bogging us down in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, killing our people, was Iran. They've been doing this the whole time. So I think people are kind of stuck in that mold of things need to be a forever war. We need to rebuild these regimes from the ground up. We need to nation build, all that kind of stuff. Boots on the ground is something you hear about all the time. We're primarily a maritime and aerospace power. If we can use those strengths to our advantage and take out the Iranian regime's ability to, first of all, attack us, attack our interests, threaten us. And Amber made a really good point there in terms of now being the moment to operate. If you wait too long, they can build up enough of an inventory to deter further action, threaten our friends. I mean, I kind of think of that as like the North Korea playbook, right? One of the reasons that it's very hard to go after North Korea militarily, first of all, they have nuclear weapons. But even before they had nuclear weapons, Seoul, South Korea is a stone's throw away from the North Korean border. They can hit the biggest city in that country with artillery. So that was kind of a way for them to deter us from doing anything about that malign and evil regime that again has been attacking our interests for quite some time. We don't want to let Iran get to that point, and so ensuring that we're dealing with that regime, cowing them, putting them down, making sure that they no longer can threaten us or our friends. That's incredibly beneficial. And like Amber was saying, there's only a limited amount of time you can do that before you kind of run out of running room there. And so I think this was important to do that. And I think you don't really need to necessarily have a boots on the ground sort of strategy, an occupation strategy, et cetera, to fix this problem. You don't even need to necessarily push regime change, although I do think that would be a good thing in this case. If we're looking to stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons, stop them from threatening our interests, clearly, even though we beat them up last year, they continued it because the Iranian regime is not necessarily a rational actor. They are a millenarian apocalyptic theological regime that is dedicated to bringing about what they believe is going to be the end times and the full Islamization of the world. And that's not something that is very easy to deal with on a diplomatic level. And it's not something that you can necessarily, beat someone down enough and they stop doing what they're doing when their entire reason for existing is being this threat. So in that case, I do think you need to kind of push more for that regime change, but it doesn't mean that we need to do it in the same way that we did in Iraq or Afghanistan. Unlike in those countries, the Iranian people seem very much upset with their government. They're very restive. Their rial is essentially worthless. So they're poor. They're fed up with this. Clearly, you saw the massive protests earlier this year. Sadly, those were put down with pretty excessive force. And but that doesn't necessarily seem to have dampened the enthusiasm of the Iranian people for pushing back against their regime. Clearly, Israel is taking a big lead in terms of those anti-regime operations. We're focusing more on those external threats, the Navy, the missiles, the nuclear program. Israel's been hitting regime targets, taking out Ayatollah Khamenei, which, by the way, what a wonderful day for humanity. That guy was horrible, horrible person. Couldn't have happened to a better guy. Take him out like that. So I think that's a great operation. It's good that Israel's focusing on that because that's much more of a threat to them than it is to us. Still a threat to us, don't get me wrong. But that's a very direct danger to them. And the Iranian people, again, they're still there. They're still restive. They still want to get rid of their regime. And the fact that they may still be coming out into the streets after this campaign is over, that's something that the Trump administration has said, Donald Trump himself, saying basically, hey, hold on a little bit, wait till we're done bombing, and then go out there and take your country back. And I don't doubt that that's going to be a powerful message for the people of Iran. This is something that was said all the time during the war on terror, but we don't really have a problem with the Iranian people. If you look back at the pre-Islamic Republic Iran, they were a pretty good ally of us. They were friends with Israel. They were friends with us. One of the interesting things about this war is that we're destroying on the ground in Israel and us a lot of old American military hardware, because that's still what they're using. Those were jets that were sold to them back in the 1970s. They were a good ally. The Iranian people are not necessarily hostile to the United States. And you see that in dribs and drabs here and there over the past several decades, right? Oftentimes they'll paint an American flag on the ground and have people, ostentatiously walk over it, right? And there are people who refuse to do that. You always see that, people kind of walking around it. And that's a very minor act of resistance, but when you're living in a totalitarian theocracy, that's a pretty big deal. So I think the people there are interested in getting rid of their regime. I don't think you could really do much worse than the Islamic Republic of Iran, given how many Americans it's killed, given how much regional destabilization it's done, and how much it's been supporting our other enemies, whether it's Russia or China. So I think a lot of folks are kind of trapped in an old paradigm here and not really understanding that things have changed both technologically for us in terms of our ability to project power without putting troops on the ground, as well as the situation in Iran itself becoming much more, amenable for us to take decisive action.
Mike's exactly right. Iran's been a regional and global threat for a long time. And just look at this extinction event that they're having right now, flinging off missiles to all their neighbors, UAE hitting the American embassy in Saudi, Qatar, Kuwait, Iraq. They're hitting Cyprus. They're hitting Italian deployment in the Gulf. They are hitting everybody and everything, and it's indiscriminate. And if you listen to some of the remaining men in charge over the military, they're like, this is pre-programmed. This was decentralized. There's no control left. It is like a starburst extinction event. It's pretty astonishing when you're looking at it, but also the regional allies finally saying, like, we will defend our territory. UAE has been just astonishing at its operational tempo and its defense. Qatar also defending its own interests. Bahrain, again, all of these countries that have been impacted by Iran for such a long time and being a net destabilizer of the area, to watch what's happened, the downstream effects of our action in Iran have just proven the malice, the malign intentions of this country, or the regime from the whole point. Like, this was always the plan for them, to hit their neighbors, to destabilize the area, to just take over. I think it really, again, it's proven the hypothesis.
When we, on X at least, the Iranian supreme leader is his title, he would openly call for the death and murder of Israel. He would talk about their desire to irradiate them with nuclear weapons. This is in the open, in the clear, right? And I've asked diplomats about this, and it was more like, whatever. But at some point, Israel and we get to believe them, right? Is that fair? I guess whichever one of you wants to start off with that. When the leader of a country that has been funding terrorism for 5 decades now, when that happens, don't we get to believe those guys, don't we?
Yeah, I think we need to. I mean, at some point, obviously, there's the difference between rhetoric and action, but they've turned that rhetoric into action over and over and over and over again. And I think a big turning point with respect to that was October 7th, 2023. I think that obviously, that was an action that Iran had planned for a long time. It does seem like it was launched by Hamas, kind of, freelancing a little bit, but clearly every part of the axis of resistance was brought in, right? The Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, obviously terrorists in the West Bank and Iraq, directly from Iran. This is all a plan, and they brought that into action. they were trying their best to destroy the state of Israel. That was the goal of that operation. It wasn't just to kill people, to harm them, to take hostages. It was to be an existential event for the state of Israel. That was the goal. And that's what they were building towards for years and years and years. And I think at that point, you have to recognize, and I think if you look at Israel, the great deal of the Israeli public began to realize this is a real problem, right? There's almost no quote unquote peacenik community in Israel anymore when it comes to the Palestinians, or especially Hamas in Gaza. And that's good. There shouldn't have been one before then, but terror events like October 7th can be clarifying for people. And I think that was clarifying for a lot of Americans too, at least decision makers, especially in the Trump movement, especially the president himself. And I think we can kind of realize that some of this is personal too. They've tried to kill the president. They've tried to kill various members of his administration. And these are not, rhetoric, right? This is people getting paid to do this, getting charged criminally with conspiring to kill these people. Whether that's Masih Alinejad, the Iranian dissident in Brooklyn, or obviously, former members of the Trump administration, John Bolton, Brian Hook, people like that, Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State, and obviously, like I said, the president himself. So this is a regime that is very, very clearly trying its best to attack us. They've been doing it for a long time, but I think now it's pretty clear that this is what their whole purpose is. And if we're going to continue ignoring that or pretending like, oh, hey, we can just make a deal with these guys and they'll go away. I think it's been, blatantly obvious over the past decade that Iran's not interested in any sort of good faith deal making. If you look at the JCPOA under Obama, first of all, that deal would have expired already by now in terms of the main anti-nuclear weapons parts of it. Didn't do anything with ballistic missiles, didn't do anything with regional proxies. And Iran continued apace throughout that entire time with building its nuclear program, building its missiles, building its proxies, all to use them, right? It's not just trying to survive, right? The regime's not just trying to survive. Because if it was, like Amber said, they wouldn't be attacking every other country in the region. They'd be trying to, hey, this is a unprovoked aggression on the part of the Americans and Israelis. We're only going to hit back at them. But no, they're not doing that. They're hitting every country, including countries like Qatar that have largely been kind of in their camp over the past decade or so. So it's clearly they're a threat to the region. They're not interested in diplomacy, and their talk is real. They're putting it into action. And I think recognizing that and dealing with that is pretty important. And I'm glad we're finally kind of coming around to the reality of the situation here.
Amber, what do you think?
Well, I've heard from a lot of vets on this matter to say when we were in Iraq and Afghanistan, actually, we were fighting Iran the whole time. Like they were the power broker behind a lot of the action, the IEDs, the sabotage of troops, and just low-level terrorist ops. The whole time, the enemy was something else. It was Iran. So Mike makes a good point that it isn't rhetoric, it is action. And I think the American populace is not aware of all the actions. Like, I don't think the line has been made clear to lay people exactly what Iran does. It seems like it's a faraway place. Leave well enough alone. Why are we starting something? And that is just divorced from the body of facts. So Iran's been a problem for a long time. And I've said on this show, snipping these threads from Venezuela to Iran to China to Russia and even Ukraine is wrapped up in this. All those Shahed drones that went to Ukraine from this malign, theocracy, all of this is connected. And I think the Trump administration is doing an incredible job unraveling this web of wicked actors in the globe without overt pressure on China, just indirectly. So this sentiment that was mentioned earlier, what do American people know? What do these lawmakers know who are reacting to this action? I think it's divorced from the body of facts. That's what I would say. But back to the veteran communities who have a lot to say about Iran's nefarious influence in Iraq and some of these other, war on terror actions. Pete, you're the expert in that. What do you think? What did you feel that the whole time? Did you feel like there was somebody behind the curtain?
Every day, every day. Yeah, I mean, part of my mission was to determine that. Where are they at? Where are they going to put bombs? Where's the bomb maker? All that stuff. In effect, me and Soleimani were having it out every day on the streets, trying to figure out where that reflection of Iran was, so we could eliminate it. And by this, I don't mean like be nice to him. I mean kill him, find him, and kill him. That's what I was trying to do. I was talking to a guy in Iraq. This is Baghdad province, just outside of Baghdad city, but still pretty urban. And we were talking about the presence of Iran. This is not a subject you just bring up directly. Like it's dangerous for them to talk about. And so I'm using all of my skill to bring this up in a way to see what he would say. And he's like, nope, 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 no Iran here. Nope, 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 not me. And I'm like, they are probably in this immediate area. I don't know if I was right about that, but that was my sense. And next to him was a pole, and he started climbing his arm up the pole and is hanging onto it like he was a human piece of ivy. This man was so uncomfortable. Now, look, I know how to read body language, and that tells me he's uncomfortable. Maybe not, right? But what I knew was I couldn't talk to Iran about him and get a real answer right then. So I've hunted, I've looked for it, I've found cells. They've funded all kinds of evil stuff. And so, yeah, we for sure we're fighting that. Beyond that, I know a lot of Iraqis, and I was talking to my Iraqi network, and I may still bring someone on from that point of view. And half the nation hates the Iranian influence, half of it. And that's not just a religious thing, it's more of a political thing. And so we're not only helping free the Iranian people potentially, but also the Iraqis who just want to be able to run their own country, because there's absolutely a political conflict there between those two countries. And I heard that every day when I was in Baghdad province. Every day. It didn't matter if they were Sunni or Shia. It mattered if they were Iraqi or Iranian. And then what the Iranians did, because the Iranians didn't just fight with EFPs against us, they also fought with farm products, undermining the sale of. I heard about tomatoes all the time, specifically, but that conflict was everywhere. So it wasn't just military; it was political, it was social, it was cultural, it was agricultural. These guys were fighting across what we call multi-domain infrastructure for that conflict. So yes, it was a real thing. And when here's the funny thing is they weren't terribly competent at the military side, but here's what Iran would do to beat us. They would go into these little towns that we would put in a pumping station to bring fresh water in, and then we wouldn't do our job and make sure that system was an actual sustainable system. And so the Red Crescent would come in, aka Iran, and they would say, hey, we'll make sure this works. We'll make sure we provide you guys with water. And they would spend just a little bit of money, a little bit of time, have like a field operative that would go around and would care for these facilities so that the thing that we built wouldn't fail. It would actually work. And it drew people closer to Iran because that's what they wanted, was fresh water. And Iran could provide that on the money that we had spent in building all these pumping stations. This is one of many examples of this on how they fought us. So this bigger thing to snip these wires that Amber's talking about, it's a real thing to undermine the power and the connectivity in all ways between Iran, Russia, Venezuela. This isn't just this direct impact, right? So first off, fuck all those mullahs and all those guys who did all that stuff that caused all that harm. But also look at how Iran is trying to undermine its neighbor, Iraq. Those guys have age. They're never going to fully settle that. But all of this stuff is going on, and now it's all has a chance to be reduced. And I'm glad to take that chance, because it's not the only way it would be worse is if Iran had a nuclear weapon, because they would absolutely use it. I don't think anybody who looks at this problem can safely say, oh, they were just playing around with that. No, they absolutely intended to take one somewhere and blow someone up. That was how they were approaching the world, and they are an Iranian death cult. That's what they were. And they also ruined the lives of millions of young men across the Middle East in inculcating them into this hateful world and warping their religion into something awful. I would talk to Iraqi male after Iraqi male, and this is a theme across other countries too, but they would have no future. They would have no comprehension of where they could possibly be and what could possibly happen for their benefit. All of them had all of their future ripped from them by this whole ideological approach to life. And it makes, look, a guy like me, I was looking for a guy like that because he's exploitable. And if I can find young exploitable dudes, well, that can cause a lot of ruckus. And those dudes are replaceable, but the lives that they impact are not. So I guess that's my whole thing about all of that. Yes, we fought Iran every single day. Who wants to go next?
Yeah, one thing I just want to jump off on what both of you have said about the web of connections here, because I think that's really an underrated aspect of this. Obviously, Iran is a direct threat to America. And I have no problem arguing that point. I think that's been pretty clear. We've been chatting about that. But the connections between our adversaries in the 21st century are much deeper and much closer than I think most Americans know. You talk about Venezuela, right? Venezuela was issuing false passports to members of Hezbollah to smuggle them into the United States. That is an Iranian-Venezuelan nexus that I don't think a lot of people understand. And that's something that threatens us directly here at home, right? It's not just, oh, it's all the way across there in the Persian Gulf. It's, oh, right across the Caribbean Sea. So I think that's a big difference here. If we look at the close ties between these countries, Iran was a big part of it. Right? If you look at sanctions evasion, Iran basically invented that industry. All of our enemies around the world relied on them for expertise on avoiding sanctions, on passing goods through third countries. Iran, sends all their oil out all the time. They're still exporting it, even though it's under extremely heavy sanction. And that's because they're able to find ways to either, take ships under false flags, move product and pretend it's a third country origin, et cetera, et cetera. China gets a ton of oil from Iran. And I think that's an underrated aspect of this too, right? If you're taking out Iran's ability to export oil to China, that saps a major source of fuel and energy that the Chinese military would need to move on Taiwan, for example. Removing these sorts of secondary actors, right? Folks, you always get folks saying, hey, this is a distraction from China. We need to prioritize China, focus on that. I don't disagree. I think China is our major threat here. But you don't undermine China by allowing their proxies and friends all around the world to operate with impunity, right? If China was to invade Taiwan, I can guarantee you that they would be fomenting strife in the Middle East through Iran, in Europe through Russia, in the Americas through Venezuela. All those are ways that they would, kind of distract us elsewhere, make it so that we can't put all of our forces in the Indo-Pacific to deter or confront a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. So removing these actors or neutering their ability to, distract us or cause problems for us is really bad for China. Again, removing the sanctions evasion nexus. Right now, China is not under totally huge sanctions like we do on Russia or Iran or Venezuela. But if they were to invade Taiwan, I'm assuming, and I think this is a fair assumption, one of the major first things we do is sanction the bejesus out of China. And if they're able to evade those through all these well-established networks, especially ones that were led by Tehran, I think that would give them kind of a way out. Lots of different ways that the Iranian regime has been working with our enemies. Like Amber was saying, the Shahed drones in Russia against Ukraine. That was a major issue here. And they're doing this actively now, and it's only going to get worse if China was to, really kind of flex their muscles in the Pacific. And so I do think that this operation against Iran, just like the operation against Venezuela, if you look at it in the big picture, those are also anti-China operations. We're not going to move militarily on China. That would kind of just be stupid. Let them go first, and we can try to deter it or counter them. But there are ways to undermine their strength and deter them, without just posting up a few carriers over in the Taiwan Strait. You can do that in different ways by taking out their friends, by removing these networks, making it harder for them to source materials or build their war machine. And so I think that is one of the things that they're doing right now in this operation, is kind of trying to limit that Chinese ability to move forward in the future. And so I think that's good. That's just kind of a secondary aspect of this. Obviously, the regime itself is the problem in Iran. But if it can also hurt China or Russia, that's great. And I think that is something that's going to happen now, especially given how tightly intertwined these countries are. But also at the same time, China's not doing anything about this. They're sending strongly worded letters. Same thing with Venezuela. These are Chinese client states, essentially, in a lot of ways. Their air defenses are not working very well. Their missiles are not working very well. They're not going in there to lend direct material support to these, beleaguered governments in the face of the U.S. So I think, in a broader stance, we're also seeing how, if you're going to pick a side here, China's side may not be the most reliable.
Thanks for that question, Amber. I appreciated that. It was something I was dying to talk about, and you opened the door wide for me. And the ground truth stuff works, right? We have to understand these things all link together, and that was it was great to be able to kind of think through and give an answer. Thanks for I got to be a guest on my own show for a minute there. Thanks.
Mhm.
We were talking off mic about the Straits of Hormuz. Straits are
Mhm.
important. Gosh, if you can name three of them, you probably know the names of the three most important straits. But we're seeing a different conflict that's not U.S. versus Iran right now. So talk a little bit about sort of that topic, and then we'll go from there.
This is the economic piece, and these are secondary and tertiary effects. And that is the insurance and reinsurance market to uh, provide insurance coverage for tankers transporting oil through Straits of Hormuz. Lloyd's of London and other insurers are no longer able to calculate the risk on ships. And part of that, as we spoke off camera, is there's been a throttling of intelligence through Five Eyes going to the UK, which has long been suspected of having a tight relationship with Lloyd's of London. Lloyd's being so precise on their insurance predictions because they had sources of information to tell them where geopolitical risk and threat lie. So now, if Lloyd's can't insure tankers, the market dries up, and it just makes it more expensive, more difficult to transport oil. And China is on the receiving end of this sort of economic collateral. This move again, this isn't a state actor; these are private markets. But again, where are the downstream effects and how is it impacting? If you can't move it, they can't use it, and makes Taiwan a more difficult proposition altogether, especially considering Venezuela's been taken offline. So I think it's interesting to watch some of these, again, secondary effects of the action in the Middle East, the action against Iran, as well as questioning these ally ships with the UK, with Spain. Where can we use bases? Where's America deploying from? How are they refueling? All of it moves together. There is that economic piece. So I've wrapped up a lot there. Lloyd's,
Yeah.
Five Eyes, Diego Garcia, but it all is connected in a way that you need to look at
It just
more
taking the
granularly.
straight. Sorry, I didn't mean to step on you there.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, taking the whole thing about the Straits things, obviously like Lloyd's of London, and they're not getting we need those guys to be able to insure things. Lloyd's does not insure things it expects to get sunk. And so if they don't know what the risk is, they're not going to get it. So, and then the reinsurance on top of that, those folks are only looking to make money, and Lloyd's is trying to offload risk. If they can't measure the risk, well, then they can't do that. And so and that is going to cause political pressure internally inside of their system, so that they go over to Starmer's house and go, hey, knock it off, because we can't do what we're supposed to do. Beyond that, if the cost of potato chips goes up because we can't use the straits in some way, whether it's America or wherever it is, also internal political pressure. We get really comfortable rocketing people if we can't get our cans of chew and our tires. Like we get really okay with that really fast. So this is a giant competition that we're having right now. And the US's ability to say, you're not doing this, you're not doing that, you're not doing that. It makes China say, hey, we can't extend a whole lot of capacity towards these things. They've got to rethink some of their things. And anybody who feels like they have any internal threat from the Mossad and Israel's incredible intelligence collection assets is now shoring up, looking over their shoulders. So everybody's sort of checking on where they are, because there is this power player, the U.S., exerting its force. And there's a bit of a critical thing here, but there is some culpability on the U.S.'s part. We've not been an angel towards Iran. We're not innocent of blowing things up and causing chaos. How much of this stuff do we owe? I mean, look, obviously we're not a bad actor like Iran is, but the next time we blow up someone's wedding with a drone won't be the first or last time. We've done these kind of things. How much culpability do we have? And does that deny us the ability to try to create order from the disorder in the Middle East? Who wants to take that? Amber, come on in. What do you want to do about our culpability and all of this stuff?
I struggle with the whataboutism as a conceit. Iran's nefarious, wicked actions for a prolonged period of time that has no redeeming qualities to it whatsoever. I struggle to see the comparison. I would agree there's blowback action to United States operations around the globe, or what we have viewed to be in our interest. And I think outcomes and intent are different things, but the United States is a completely different case than Iran. And the net good, the net benefit of capitalism and the United States action globally, rebuilding Europe after World War II, as an example, and Korea, and all of the people that have been lifted out of poverty because of our actions, as well as the security umbrella provided to all of Europe and our Pacific allies. I just don't see that Iran can be compared. Like, I again struggle with the whataboutism. What about these outcomes that were less than we expected? It's really hard for me to say that the United States operates with a malign intention. Again, how it turns out and what was intended, those are different things. So
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, I think the key here is imperfect country, America, versus actually evil country, which is Iran. And when I say country, I'm talking about government. I'm not talking about the people of Iran. Again, I mean, I think they've been repressed as much as anybody by the Islamic Republic. It's one of those things where if we drone strike a wedding, it's usually an accident. It's bad intelligence, bad information. When Iran's proxies go blow up Marine barracks in Beirut, or they go and paraglide into a music festival and rape and kill people, that's purposeful. And so I think there's a major difference there between the two. Again, I think overall outcomes, if you're looking even at like net, I think the U.S. is a player for good in the world, especially since World War II, when we've had a more active international role. I mean, if you just look at global, large scale conflict, since World War II, it's been far, far less than it was in the century before that. And part of that is due to nuclear weapons, to be honest. Part of that's also due to the influence of American power, soft and hard power, in terms of promoting security and basically trying to deter grand, large-scale wars like that. And I think one of the ways that you get that peace is through strength. That's the only thing that President Trump's talked about, going back to President Reagan as well. And you can't, force a peace on people who don't want to have peace. The way you can do that, if you're going to do that at all, is by making it so that their rational calculus shows that going to war is going to be very, very, very bad for them. I think that's one of the things that is the problem with Iran, is that calculus is entirely different in a regime that has that really, really strong ideological and religious basis. It's very, very hard to engage with them as a rational actor. When, like you said, Pete, earlier in this conversation, if they got nukes, they'd use them. North Korea, for instance, they got nukes. I think that's terrible. I wish they did not. That's bad for the world. But North Korea is mostly having nuclear weapons for regime survival. And that's bad enough. I mean, the people in North Korea are horribly oppressed. But they're not out there, nuking Seoul tomorrow. They could. They have the ability to do that, but they have not. If Tehran got nukes, they'd be dropping them on Tel Aviv. That is, without a question, something that would happen. And I think one of the things about this current conflict with Iran that is concerning is the nuclear weapons aspect of it. Obviously, with Midnight Hammer, we did destroy a lot of their program there. But their program was meant to, build legitimate nuclear warheads that they could put on missiles and launch at foreign countries. That's not the only way you can weaponize nuclear material. And so I think once that program was devastated, that did not necessarily end Iran's malign nuclear ambitions. They obviously kept trying to get nuclear weapons to weaponize the nuclear material they had. But you can do that in like a dirty bomb or something. And that's, not as destructive, but still very destructive. And again, for a regime like Iran, they'd have no compunction to using something like that. That's not about deterrence on their part. That's about offensive, aggressive action meant to bring about the goals of the regime, which are the destruction of America and the destruction of Israel. And so I think, again, you got to take that rhetoric seriously. And you got to take the fact that they kept going after these nuclear weapons over and over and over again. After Stuxnet, after the killing of all their nuclear scientists, after Midnight Hammer, after all that kind of stuff, they didn't stop. And so I think you need to take that into account when you're thinking about, what kind of regime is Iran and how culpable are they versus how culpable are we. We've had nuclear weapons since 1945. We used them to end World War II. We have not used them since. That's one thing that I think you need to look at. Again, if you're looking at Iran, they would have used nuclear weapons. I think that's pretty much beyond a doubt at this point.
To be fair, we've used them to test as well.
Oh, true. We haven't blown up other countries for it. And again,
Right.
I think Iran would very much be doing that. And if you look at what they've been doing since they're getting attacked now, they're just lashing out at everybody. So I don't doubt that a regime like that with nuclear weapons would be an existential threat to the region and a really, really horrible threat for all of humanity, to be honest.
Some of this stuff. Go ahead, Amber.
Oh, I was going to say Mike's correct in that you can't overstate the power of a nuclear deterrent. Watch what European allies have done this week. They're going to have their own nuclear umbrella under France. Germany has been making moves to say we need more access to nuclear. They're going to have, again, a more robust program. Macron says we're not going to tell you how much nuclear power we have, going forward. And again, the nuclear deterrence isn't lost on European allies, the strength of this thing. So for anybody who isn't in favor of a move on Iran because of a nuclear question, yet they make moves of their own to chase this thing that has been, kept in the hands of just a few since 1945, it is really interesting to see the inconsistencies in position in that regard. But the nuclear umbrella is real, it's powerful, and it is the last remaining strength that Western countries have, and it cannot be in the hands of an Iran. That's number one. But number two, something Mike said, is that peace through strength, watching the Gulf countries have their own response to Iran has been really interesting. How strong and fortified these countries have been, because they've always perceived the threat to be real, to be existential. And they had the equipment, the training, and the know-how to strike down drones and missiles all day long. If you look at the count of missiles and drones that UAE has been striking down so they don't continue to hit the Burj Khalifa, like they were ready and prepared for this threat. So a nuclear enhancement on top of what Iran already had is existential to all the neighbors, not just Israel, to everybody.
And that's credit to the U.S.'s partnerships with Israel and Jordan over the last, half a century. And we built that and expanded it out. I was proud of those nations that have partnered with us using weapon systems that we've trained them on and continue to partner with them on, and them protecting themselves from one neighbor ultimately, and it's always been Iran with that. Yes, there's some other regional conflicts, but the prime mover here is Iran. And we've seen Saudi Arabia come back towards the middle and been like, hey, we want to move forward. It's fine to be critical of what any administration does. We all should do that. That's what Americans should do. We should be looking and keeping a stink eye on whoever's holding the power right now. But we have to also allow the Abraham Accords, which were advancing during President Trump's first administration, and that desire of those nations to come on board and focus more on business as opposed to, nefarious business. At some point, we have to start saying, hey, this is an opportunity here to get the Middle East to be peaceful. Wow. And it does seem like it, in general, is walking in that direction. The one big anchor was the insanity going on in Iran. Have we seen a tipping point? Are we gonna in our lifetimes see a peaceful, prosperous Middle East? Is that too crazy to think that that's possible right now?
I think it's possible. Do I think it's likely? I'm not sure. I think there's always going to be internal conflicts there. I mean, look at Iran getting kind of decimated here. You still have the countries that are very supportive of like the Muslim Brotherhood, like Turkey or Qatar, that are kind of willing to fill that void. And they're pushing, just as much anti-Israel stuff as Iran was. Very much less, genocidal, than Iran is, at least outwardly. But you definitely still have that tension. I think we can make it so that the region is pacified. I think that's doable. Peaceful in terms of whether there's broad comedy between these countries. Not so sure about that. I do think there's broader geopolitical and cultural issues at play, even the religious divide, for instance. But you can make it a lot safer for us and a lot safer for our friends and a lot better for business. Like you were saying, I think the Abraham Accords are going to be a major shifting point in terms of looking at the history of the region, getting these countries to recognize Israel and to recognize that, hey, this is a changing region. We're not going to, be exporting oil for another 150 years and building our entire economies around that. These countries have really, really young populations. And the population of Saudi Arabia, last time I checked a couple of years ago, was something like the average age was 19 or 20. That's an incredibly young population. And that's someone that is going to be looking for opportunities. They're not going to necessarily be happy with the situation that they're in. A lot of these Gulf monarchies especially are interested in preserving their own government structures, their own wealth and power. And if they can make their countries more resistant to economic shocks, more profitable in the future, pardon me, more peaceful internally, and with Israel, which has been kind of the bugbear of a lot of these countries for its entire existence. I think that's a positive step. And so I think you can get that with a lot of the Gulf countries. I think Saudi Arabia coming onto the Abraham Accords would be great, be beneficial for pretty much everybody. But we'll see. I think if you're able to remove a player like Iran from the table that's so destabilizing, I think you're able to kind of cut a lot of these other knots that are causing problems within the region. So hopefully that'll be the case in this circumstance.
Amber.
I think Meg makes a great point, and that is a lot of these Gulf countries are going to be re-underwriting their relationship with Iran, number one, since the regime has been taken out, 49 people the first day. And then again, the conclave that was bombed this morning, losing a lot of people. I think it allows Gulf monarchies to do a couple things, and that is show sovereign strength as countries of their own to their people, to challenge this regional threat, and to say, this is our new positionality vis-a-vis the United States. Even Saudi Arabia is looking to maybe make some moves again after the embassy bombing. I think it gives them a chance to re-underwrite their relationships globally and regionally. And maybe this is just the pretext for doing that, because secretly they were already, having deep conversations with Washington, having these sort of military training collaborations, as well as the equipment that was already there. But to allow a more public facing realignment, that could be the opening. But mentioning the Abraham Accords, again, is predicated biblically, and the long history of the region isn't lost. And what a lot of Iranians are seeing now, as well as Jewish friends, they're seeing this reverse Cyrus. Cyrus freed the Jews, and now the Jews will free the Persians. And this isn't lost, the historiography of this action and the sentiment about building a stronger coalition between Iran and Israel. And, India is part of that as well. There's this regional bloc that believes we are a long-running history of humanity that should be collaborating in a better, more prosperous, peaceful way. And I think that we'll see this provides an opening for that sort of sentiment to bubble up and to make transformative changes, because the cultural piece undergirds that. And I think Mike mentioned earlier, this is the time for Iranians to take back their country. There's going to be a time when they're told to come out of their house and really do the overthrow. And I think that moment is just weeks away.
It's good to hear. I like it when it's weeks away. Yeah. How long are we going to be dealing with these things? What's next? The Trump administration keeps busy, and so it doesn't sit around for long. We have the Board of Peace that looks to be has a lot of potential, certainly better than what the UN has become. The UN has become a political mess. So are we going to see more of these kind of, we're always worried about World War III is starting, and we see all the things that come with that. A lot of this is information operations being thrown at us. We're getting things wrong because the news can be very confusing. I guess, are we going to see more tumult as the president and his crew continue to go out and try to fix how they see, that's their job, these problems, or will we see it coming about internally in the States where it's like, yeah, actually, these are good investments in our time and money? What do you guys think?
Well, I think it's interesting abroad, at least in terms of how this is going to kind of shake out. I don't think this is going to be nearly as simple an operation as the Venezuela one. It's very different. Obviously, we took out Maduro. His second in command is in charge there, and I say that for now. I don't think that's going to be a long-term thing. I do think there will be elections in Venezuela. I do think there will be a new government at some point. I trust a guy like Marco Rubio, who's been thinking about that particular issue for most of his political career, to do the right thing in that regard. But Iran is much more complicated, right? You really can't just put a number two in place and deal with them, because it's, again, the ideological nature of the regime matters, right? Caracas is criminal, but Tehran is theological, and that's a big difference in terms of how you can deal with them. It'll be interesting to see what happens afterward. I do think the Iranian people will, rise up, and how successful they'll be will be dependent on a lot of different factors. How much we support them, number one, whether that's non-kinetic means like giving them weaponry, finding ways to improve communications internally. Obviously, the Iranian government still has shut down the internet. So that's obviously a big problem. If you can't coordinate any sort of internal uprising or rebellion, then it's very difficult to be successful, especially against a regime that is willing to use force. The good thing is we can, along with Israel, reduce their ability to use that force. They may be willing to do it, they may be ready to do it, but if they're not able to, if we're able to destroy various means of repression, whether that's weaponry, ammunition depots, mustering points, command and control nodules, things like that, that's a way that we can make it so that it's harder for the regime to fight back against its own people. I think this is going to be a long haul, maybe not for us. I think we'll be involved kind of in a secondary manner for quite some time here. But in terms of like active Operation Epic Fury, I don't think that's going to be an extremely long-term prospect. Part of the reason is because it's not necessarily in our interest to be constantly bombing Iran if we have other challenges around the world, and if we have an ally in Israel that is more than capable of doing a lot of the heavy lifting on their own, at least after we've taken out the things that only U.S. munitions can take out. And like Amber was saying too, that the Gulf countries coming in, that could also be very beneficial here, not only in terms of their cooperation with Israel under a broader U.S. umbrella, but also in terms of providing kind of more firepower and allowing us to take a secondary role after kind of helping lead the operation in the beginning. In terms of internally with Iran, what comes next? I mean, the Iranian army is very different than the IRGC or the Basiji in terms of being kind of a long-term aspect of the state. Really not all that different than when it was under the Shah. They're just kind of still the army. But the IRGC, which is the really radical theological army, is the one that is kind of forcing itself forward here. And I think it's interesting to see what happens afterward, whether there'll be opposition figures to coalesce around. The Shah in exile, so to speak, is kind of floating around the edges here. So we'll see what happens with that. If there's other groups that kind of become more, outwardly influential internally, it's hard to think about, right? You think about Venezuela, where there were opposition candidates in elections. You have recognized opposition figures. Iran's different. I mean, it's been almost 50 years of totalitarian control. It's very hard to be an outward opposition figure within Iran and not be killed, to be blunt about it. So maybe as the regime gets weaker, we'll see more of those, underground networks come into the open. But I think we have to be open to kind of whatever options are available here to weaken the regime and to support whoever the Iranian people kind of push forward. I don't think we should be installing our own candidate, for example, there. I don't necessarily think that's going to work or something that would be supportable by the vast majority of Americans. Besides Iran, I mean, I think Cuba's got to be, crapping their pants right now. They're clearly on the chopping block. They were very supportive of Venezuela. Same with Iran. They're going to be a lot easier than the Iranian operation for sure. So we'll have to see what happens there. But I think they're kind of on the chopping block if we're going to go to another country here and try to kind of settle some scores.
The Shah in exile, Reza Pahlavi, is so extremely popular and highly regarded. And when you hear his name chanted in the streets of, of Iran and other capitals, and the calls for, Javid Shah, like long live the Shah, he has been very clear about, I want to lead a transition. I'm not running for office. I'm not wanting to sit on a throne. I want to lead the transition. And he's been preparing for that for decades. I think he has a lot of support outside of Iran. And now, with a few cracks in the internet and more Starlink terminals, you're saying there is support on the ground. In my opinion, he's the lead candidate to come in for a transition, not permanent rule, but for a transition, because he has the cultural, historical legitimacy to do the job, whereas anybody else would lack that legitimacy. It wouldn't matter if they were qualified. They're not going to have the legitimacy or the acceptance. And there's something beautiful and resonant about bringing in, the Shah in exile and the Pahlavis, because it means a restoration to pre-1979. It brings back a lot of the sentiment, the purpose, and the cultural coherence that has been missing, because most Iranians don't identify with the regime. So, in my opinion, he's a lead candidate for transition, and however long that transition lasts. But I do think he has a particular plan, as well as resonance with Iranians and the diaspora, especially. So he's the top of my list there. Cuba, you bring up a good point. I think it's possible they're going to be getting a MacArthur plan of just, I don't know, some sort of custody. Who's getting custody of Cuba? They're going to fail to be able to provide for their own people now that they can't export their doctor trade and get cheap oil and all the things. Like, they are in some real trouble. So I don't know if they're getting put into, some court ordered receivership or a MacArthur plan, but they're not going to make it. So we'll see what happens there. But I think all of these pieces show a real sophisticated mosaic. And I would also put into consideration some of the NATO allies and their relationships are going to be reinterrogated. Spain in particular, and some of their behaviors around using air bases, that's going to be interrogated. The UK, that's going to be interrogated. The need for Greenland, Panama Canal, and Venezuela, all of these actions are being exposed or being highlighted with more clarity, more brightness on why it was an issue in the first place. And I think people are getting a real education on how this puzzle fits together. Because at first it seemed like Greenland, like, we don't need Greenland. And then you look at a map and it's like, oh, Alaska and Greenland are like bookends. Oh, I get it now. Like, it will start to make more sense that strategic thinkers were viewing this in a way that is more sophisticated than the chance on the street would have given credit for. But I think this is an opportunity and a democratic opening for Iran, and then all the other countries that were mentioned down the line that have been under the thumb of this malign regime for so long.
This again, back to the critique thing. We get to critique the administration. I wonder if we're taking on too many things that we can't control them. Who maintains them? Sure, we have great plans and intent now, but the next administration comes in, whoever that is, they might change the approach. We have the think tank class, and right now I'm looking at a post on X from Tim Carney, and he's talking about how the president doesn't have a blanket authority to send people to deploy for 60 days. And there's a guy who's a senior fellow at a think tank, right? I'm not saying whether John is right or wrong, but he has an opinion and he's going to inform people. He'll have influence in DC, and he's got a lot of people like that. There's a whole cadre of people that have PhDs based upon what Russia's going to do next. And they are desperate for Russia to be this monster, whether Russia is or not. And that's how they make their money. So there's a lot of things that kind of confound success in our system and claw things back. And I'm using a couple of examples. They're welcome to be right. I'm not trying to say anybody's a bad person, but we have a lot of contrarians. We have a lot of folks that foresee the future and try to self-fulfill those futures. So can we reliably navigate our way through this? I mean, the next time the State Department goes somewhere and fucks it up won't be the first or last time. So how much of this is good news? How much of this is good news today, but going to change later? What's your guys' sense of how we are doing? How do we deal with the John Carneys of the world? Or is John Carney right, for crying out loud? Oh, and by the way, let's also mix in the, oh no, there's not enough missiles, that whole thing too, because that's a bunch of nonsense as well. But let's cover some of this discursive dialogue, if you want it to be discursive, and talk, kind of provide some clarity as to like, what are we seeing? How do we deal with this? How do we take Donald Trump, who's odious in so many ways and unlikable in so many ways and does dumb things all the time, but also allow him to have a win as long as it's available? And help me out with this, you two. I don't know what to do with all these things.
I think it's complicated. I mean, in terms of legal authorities, I'm not an expert on that sort of thing, but there definitely is some broad authority for the president to do some of this stuff. Part of that is because Congress simply just hasn't done its job in half a century. So that is largely their fault. But they've kind of put in place a lot of these abilities and ways that the president can kind of unilaterally command the military and use it for national purposes. If this is short term in terms of our active bombardment, that is beneficial. That makes it more legally justifiable, which whether that should be the case or not, we can debate that endlessly, but that is the case in terms of what the law is. But the longer this lasts in terms of our active bombardment and things like that, I think the more politically complicated it gets. So that's one of the reasons I don't think this is going to be super long term. You look at the Maduro operation, right? Like, we're still involved with Venezuela. We're still dictating things to the regime. We're still kind of threatening them here and there, controlling oil flows, things like that, dealing with narco terrorists in the various oceans, also with stopping oil shipments, taking over shadow fleet tankers and things like that. So it's less of an operational tempo than it was. The Maduro operation was much larger. So I think if you look at that as a model, as obviously much less complicated, but we can kind of wean down our active participation, especially, like I said, when we have allies like the Israelis that are more than happy to kind of pick up the slack in this case specifically. And that's kind of related to those missiles that you were talking about as well. I mean, if you look at what's going on in Iran right now, there's essentially almost zero ability for them to stop any sort of dropping bombs on their territory. There's almost no air defenses. The ability for them to take down high-tech American or Israeli aircraft, whether that's drones or otherwise, is highly limited. Israel's at the point almost where they're able to switch to kind of quote unquote dumb bombs. Instead of launching missiles from standoff distance, they're able to kind of stand in, fly over target, and drop their munitions, which you're not generally able to do in modern warfare against a country that has like a sizable military. But we've so degraded their capacity to take down our sorties and our aircraft that I think we're kind of reaching that point where this question would be entirely moot, given that we'd be able to use different munitions that are not necessarily our most expensive or most high-tech ones. It'll be interesting to see how long this goes. Like I said, I don't think it'll be long. I think the sooner you knock these sort of operations out, both in this president's second term and how quickly you get them done, I think that kind of creates facts on the ground that may make it more difficult for a future president to kind of unravel that, right? If you destroy the Iranian regime and something else takes its place, you're not going to be able to have a new Democratic president come in and say, hey, you guys can have nuclear weapons in 10 years. You can still enrich uranium. We're still going to balance you guys against Israel in the Middle East and our Gulf allies. Like, the Obama foreign policy is dead once you kill the regime. And if you're able to do that, or help the Iranian people do that, or help the Israelis do that, then that kind of, again, creates different facts on the ground that I'm sure, more progressive foreign policy folks would be able to finagle away to do things that I think are bad for our interests. But if you kind of do some of this stuff and remove players from the chessboard, you do limit the options there. So I think the more you can do that and act decisively, right? If you're just going in there and you're kind of mowing the lawn, doing a little bit here and there, but not actually getting to the root of the problem, then I think there is much more of an opportunity to kind of undo that in the future. But if you're really taking decisive, serious action here that has long-term lasting consequences, which, to be clear, it's only been a few days, but this operation, I think, already kind of fits that criteria, just in terms of the destruction of the regime's hierarchy. That's one thing that kind of changes how people can do things in the future. And it also changes how people react to us, other countries, enemies and allies alike. I think people would be very, very wary of pursuing nuclear weapons right now if you're another, kind of pariah country, because look at what we just did to our own. That's one of those things that I think, again, creates some facts on the ground and changes the way that people have a calculus about this. And that's one of those things that, again, you can change it with the new administration, but it's still there. So let's see how it goes. But I'm optimistic that creating new facts on the ground will kind of limit some of those potential future negative outcomes.
The confusion, Amber. What are we going to do about it?
Okay, let's start with think tankers.
Okay, good. Please.
There's a very low rate of variability on opinions that come out of think tanks in particular, especially under the Trump administration. It's very narrow and sclerotic, and it is all reactive to the messenger, not the message. But if you look at the string of successes the Trump administration has had at the Supreme Court because of all of the, like frivolous lawsuit and challenges that have been brought against them, like they continue to win at the Supreme Court. So armchair experts or part-time lawyers who are like, it's not legal, it's not legal, it's not legal. I think that we're going to see what happens. I think this administration is pretty careful as to what they think their lane is, operationally speaking, legally speaking, what framework can be utilized. And even in the case of like tariffs, there's still 5 more ways that those tariffs can prevail in spite of the Supreme Court ruling on that. So my takeaway is think tankers often say things like Donald Trump has no plan for the day after. And this is a group of people who have never spoken to Donald Trump, don't know what his plan is for the day after, but they come out like very decisively, definitively to say there's no plan. And here's why it's a failure. And we're 48 hours into an operation. So I take issue with that. And as someone with a PhD who does a lot of policy research, I really try and couch my remarks on here's the set of facts that I see. This is where I think it could go. Here's how it's contextualized. But I don't ever declare definitively who Donald Trump is, who anybody is. Like I'm matching rhetoric to action for a psychobiographical profile. And this is what I anticipate is going to be the thing. So I really push back on some of these statements because, again, I always find it to be reflexive or fueled by emotion. And I don't enjoy that kind of analysis, to be honest.
Yeah. Can I jump in real quick about the day after too? I think that's one of those questions that too often forestalls action and is meant to do so. I think it's very, very important to have a plan for what comes after your actions. At the same time, if those actions themselves are valuable in and of themselves in terms of destroying the Iranian regime's capability of threatening us, I think that is a good in and of itself, that you shouldn't allow questions about, exactly who are we going to put in place after this happens to kind of stop you from acting. That's just paralysis, right? I think at some point these questions are, depending on who the person asking, they can very often be in good faith. But I think oftentimes they are not in good faith, and they're meant to kind of forestall any sort of action. And in this case, I just don't think that's worth doing. I think you can decide and figure out what can happen afterward without, forcing yourself to wait until all of that happens before you take action. If you look at Israel in Gaza, for instance, right? We're not really sure exactly how they're planning to run that strip after the war is over. I mean, right now there's a ceasefire, but this is still basically ongoing. Hamas is still around. They're still disobeying a lot of aspects of the ceasefire. They're still attacking Israeli troops. But not having a concrete plan for, hey, here's the guy that's going to take over and be our friend afterward, that shouldn't stop them from getting all their hostages back, killing as many Hamas members as humanly possible. That in and of itself is good. So I think we can get paralyzed too easily by questions like this, even if they are important to address and really important to have plans for. I don't think those questions are worth not doing anything decisive in terms of action until after you've solved them.
Yeah, that's great. I don't want to keep you too long. And it's wonderful to talk with you. And thanks for just giving us a solid, candid breakdown of this. It's easy to get inflamed, but I think we're having a very reasonable conversation. So anything that you want to close with, Amber, at all? And by the way, thank you as always. We'll have Amber back tomorrow to talk some more about some of these things. Maybe Mike will be convinced as well. But Amber, anything in closing, anything else you want to bring up? We can certainly go longer, but I don't want to put that on you guys without asking first.
No, I love to see human behavior and decision making and then matching discourse to action. So if I had to say, is this a case study in what international relations should look like? I can't say that this is textbook yet, but what I do see is a clear case has been made about the threat of Iran to the United States, not just in the future, but has been an existing threat for a long time. Again, with operatives here in the US due to the open border policy and et cetera, a malign actor that has had a long list of collateral and death. And it was decisive. I don't see any other leader having done this. And again, that day after piece is something that the administration hasn't said that they have to know yet. They laid out their 4 objectives. This is what the op is. This is what we intend to do. And I think that's clear and that's digestible as a conceit and as a plan. So I'd like to leave it there that there's more to come, but overall the intention was make the world safer, freer, more prosperous. And America first doesn't mean America alone. And I think this has been a real test of allies, new and old, in this action.
Yeah. Mike?
I mean, the one thing I'd add to that is, man, you can't underestimate the incredible power, capacity, just the way we operate of the U.S. military. I mean, it's in terms of our hardware, in terms of our people, in terms of our planning. It's just incredibly, incredibly impressive. And I think if you're any of these other countries that are either our friends or our enemies looking at that, you have to kind of take that into account when you're dealing with us in the future. If you look at how Russia's been in Ukraine, right? They've been bogged down for 4 years now. That was supposed to be a quick in and out, and they haven't been able to decapitate the regime in Kiev. They haven't been able to achieve almost any of their objectives. They've captured territory, to be sure, killed a lot of people, to be sure, but they're not necessarily winning that war. And the U.S. isn't able to do something like this, like the Maduro operation, with relatively low casualties thus far. Obviously, any death or injury of any American service member is horrible, awful. You want to avoid that at any cost. At the same time, for the price that we're paying for this and the results we're getting, I think has been incredibly impressive if you're looking at it purely from an operational standpoint. And I think, we do well to remember that, how powerful the U.S. military is. I think over the past couple of decades of us fighting, non-state actors, terrorists that are able to kind of go in and out of civilian areas, and it's a very complicated way to fight. When we're dealing against an actual enemy nation, man, are we quite good at this. So I think that's worth remembering, celebrating the U.S. military for just the incredible competence we have, and even our military technology pretty much working to a T so far. So just plaudits to them for carrying out this mission.
Yeah,
Agree.
It's incredible, the blend of capacity. And by the way, just the counterintel guy has to say the human capability that's been displayed these last couple of years between Israel, America. It's shocking how competent the Mossad is, and obviously the American side, our ability to just be like a scalpel and go in and get what we need and leave, in effect, no trace. No one's talking about intel failures. It's awfully hard to sit on the other side of the fence and go, today's the day. Today's the day. You don't know, because every day is the day. This is November 10th. This is International Pizza Day. This is the day they're going to attack, and then they don't attack. It's very hard to do that. But when you have a design target that you're going after and trying to find, fix, kill, whatever, I don't think there's ever been a time where we could all feel more safe and more proud of our intel assets. We always need to do better. We always want to hold ourselves to a high standard, but it's incredible the stuff that's going on. And again, any country that's adversarial, and that can include Spain, that can include Great Britain. We all collect on each other. All of them right now are going, we got to up our game, because the game that's being played is not above the rim. It's above the backboard. They're way up there, and it is incredible. seeing that, and that has to draw the attention. Any kind of rogue state or anything just above that rogue level has to be looking around going, we do not want to draw the attention of the United States. How do we maintain a lower profile? How do we take the pot off the front part of the burner so that it's not quite so hot? Because if we draw Donald Trump's attention, we could have a real problem over here, and a problem that they have no response for. So it's I want this administration to get things right. I am very critical of Donald Trump and the things that those guys do. They're not going to get everything right, even if they have great intentions. And so there's a lot of critique left, but also I'll take Iran's power regime being toppled. I'll take a saver Israel. I'll take the advancement of the Abraham Accords. I'll take every win Scott Bessent can get us. I'll take every win Howard Lutnick can get us, on and on and on and on. I'll take all those things, because not everything Donald Trump does is evil, bad, or dumb. He does all kinds of dumb shit that he doesn't need to do. He'll do dumb shit on purpose to undermine his own success. That's the dumbest thing ever. He's not leading us in a way that allows us all to come together. That's also on him. But I'll take all those wins that we just talked about. And if I told you two that we'd be here with Venezuela having a chance to go in the right direction, Cuba toppling and possibly coming back towards the middle instead of being what they were, reduced influence of China in the Western Hemisphere, on and on and on, we would all be like, no way we did all that stuff inside of 18 months. No way, right? Like, we would all just be shocked that all this has happened with almost across the board. Like, hey, the foreign policy is really working well. I guess I just said a lot, and I should give you guys a chance to respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall there have been a lot of wins here that I wasn't expecting. I still have plenty of qualms with this foreign policy, especially in terms of Russia and Ukraine. But I think with just showing that the U.S. can just do things and be very successful at it, I think that's going to cause long-term effects far beyond this presidency. That'll be very, very beneficial to us. Will it solve all the world's problems? No. But showing that we're here, we're serious, we're willing to take decisive action when necessary, and that we have the capability to do so nearly unscathed, I think that's a pretty powerful message. And if that was the one that ends up being sent abroad by the second Trump administration, I'd be pretty happy with that.
Amber, for real, closing it up now. Anything on that, what I just said?
I think Ukraine's chances are better than ever because of this action. And that delights me to no end. The pressure on Russia and Iran and like all the collateral around Ukraine, I think their chances are better than ever at this point. And that's going to have to be a whole different show. But the technology piece that's assisting Ukraine, more action with Starlink for Ukrainians and against Russia, that's a piece. But to watch European allies say, hey, we're going to bring in our anti-drone experts from Ukraine to help out down here in the Gulf now that we're under attack, is really interesting to me, for them to prostitute the experience of the Ukrainians in that way. And that I don't like. And I also see that the Europeans to continue to work against their own interests by wanting more gas and oil from Russia via Ukraine. Like, they have a real problem over there. But my overall take is this is only helpful to Ukraine, and I would love to see more success on that front. That is definitely my prima facie concern in geopolitics, and I study the rest of this in relation to that. So I appreciate Mike bringing that up. I want to see some resolve applied in that direction, but I think all of this only helps it. So another time, gents.
Yeah, for sure. Everybody, it's the Break It Down show. You know what you're supposed to do. Subscribe. I'm supposed to say this out loud because apparently you guys don't know that, but if you would, it would be great. Thank you very much. By the way, you can see all three of us on X. It's easy to find Dr. Brittain-Hale. That's her handle. Mike, yours is Mike Cote. Is that right on X?
Yeah, it's at RATL policy.
Oh,
but yeah, Mike Cote is the display name or whatever.
It'll come up. You guys. If you can't find them, just get a hold of me. I'm glad to talk to you. I'm glad to direct you to these guys. They definitely are glad to talk. So I'll say goodbye to you two in a second. Everybody else, have a great day. I will see you a little later on, and bye-bye.